The city square was alive with noise. Cars honked, people hurried along the sidewalks, and the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the faint scent of exhaust. Near the entrance of a grand hotel, a beautiful piano sat just outside the lobby, polished and gleaming under the morning sun. A few curious people lingered nearby, some sipping their drinks, some scrolling on their phones. The piano looked inviting but also out of place, a delicate gem among the chaos of the street. A man walked slowly toward the piano. He was older, with a rough coat that had seen better days, worn shoes, and a backpack that sagged from its heavy contents. His hair was messy and his hands looked tired from hard work, though he carried himself with quiet dignity. People noticed him but quickly dismissed him as just another homeless man trying to get a few coins. He carried a small cup in his hand and his eyes scanned the people around him, hesitant yet determined. He stopped a few feet from the piano and looked at the small crowd. His voice was soft, almost timid when he spoke. "Excuse me," he said, holding up the cup. "Can I play for food?" A few people chuckled politely, thinking it was just another street performance request. But one man, clearly wealthy and wearing a sharp suit, laughed aloud. His laughter was sharp and cutting. "Play for food? What do you think this is? A circus?" he said, smirking. The homeless man's cheeks colored slightly, but he didn't argue. He simply nodded and took a few careful steps toward the piano. The piano was beautiful, a classic black with keys that reflected the sunlight. The homeless man took a deep breath, resting his hands on the edge of the keys. He looked out at the crowd, a mix of curiosity and skepticism written on their faces. The businessman who had laughed earlier crossed his arms and leaned back against a column, clearly expecting a poor performance, something awkward or pitiful that would confirm his assumptions. The man adjusted his posture on the piano bench. His fingers hovered over the keys for a moment. He closed his eyes briefly, as if he were remembering something long buried, a memory of a time when life was different. The city sounds faded slightly as he concentrated. People in the crowd shifted, sensing a change, though they didn't know why. Then, almost hesitantly, he pressed a single key. A clear, soft note floated in the air. It was simple, almost fragile, but it captured attention. The businessman laughed again, louder this time, clearly mocking the small sound. "That's it? That's your grand performance?" he called out. The homeless man didn't respond. He didn't need to. He began playing another note, then another, gradually building a melody. At first, the notes were tentative, as if testing the piano and the space. But there was a subtle precision in each touch, a careful artistry that made the music more than just sound. It became something people could feel. A few people stopped in their tracks. They tilted their heads, surprised at the clarity and emotion of the notes. The melody was simple, but there was a depth to it, a story that was unfolding without words. The businessman's smirk faltered slightly. He leaned forward, unconsciously paying attention, even though he didn't want to admit it. The homeless man's hands moved more confidently now, each note deliberate, each chord resonating with the people around him. Some in the crowd whispered to each other, expressing surprise. "He's really good," one woman said quietly. "I didn't expect this at all." The man at the piano didn't notice the whispers. He was absorbed in the music, in the connection he was making through the keys. His eyes closed as he played a short, emotional piece that seemed to reflect years of struggle, hope, and resilience. The small crowd grew, drawn by the unexpected beauty of the music. People who had passed by lingered, unable to resist the melody that floated out into the busy street. Coins began to drop into the man's cup, softly clinking together. Some were careful, some generous. A few people who had initially scoffed at the idea now smiled, realizing that this performance was more than a plea for food. It was a gift of art and emotion. The businessman who had laughed earlier frowned. He watched the man's fingers glide over the keys with increasing skill. The melody was not flashy, not intended to impress with speed or complexity. It was subtle, moving, full of feeling. He felt a strange shift inside him, a mix of admiration and embarrassment. He had mocked the man without cause, and now he couldn't look away. The man at the piano didn't stop. He shifted into a slightly more complex sequence, a small flourish here and a gentle cadence there. The music seemed to tell a story of hardship and quiet perseverance. People in the crowd were visibly affected, some wiping away tears, others simply standing still, listening as if the piano had the power to pause the busy city for a moment. A hotel employee approached cautiously, bringing a glass of water to the man. He accepted it with a quiet nod and a small smile, continuing to play. His focus was unwavering, and each note seemed to pull more people closer, more attention than he had expected. The businessman who had laughed began to feel an unfamiliar sensation: regret. He had judged this man too quickly. This wasn't a street performance begging for money. It was an expression of something deeper, a talent that had been hidden behind years of misfortune. The laughter he had shared now felt misplaced, almost foolish. He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes unwilling to leave the piano. The crowd continued to grow as the homeless man's music gained confidence. People who had initially scoffed were now captivated, silently acknowledging the skill and emotion in his hands. Some had pulled out their phones, recording the moment to show friends or simply to remember the experience. The man at the piano remained humble, never looking at the camera or the growing audience. His focus was purely on the music and the connection it created. He played for a long time, each note deliberate, weaving a tapestry of sound that seemed to capture the attention and hearts of everyone around. The street, once noisy and chaotic, now felt almost sacred in that small space, centered on a man, a piano, and a melody that spoke without words. As the final notes lingered in the air, a hushed silence fell over the crowd. People looked at each other in awe, some unable to speak, others exchanging quiet nods of respect. The man at the piano simply closed the lid gently, took a deep breath, and looked around, acknowledging the audience with a humble smile. He hadn't asked for applause or attention, only a small meal. Yet in that moment he had given something far greater, a reminder that talent and humanity cannot be measured by appearances or circumstance. The businessman finally spoke, his voice quieter, more thoughtful. I didn't expect that, he admitted, almost to himself. The homeless man offered a small nod in response, neither proud nor boastful. He had played, and that was enough. People dropped more coins into his cup, not out of pity, but in genuine appreciation. Some offered words of encouragement, smiles, and nods of respect. The man took it all with quiet dignity, grateful for the kindness but never letting it distract him from the music that lived inside him. The city square slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the impression of those moments lingered. People walked away changed, reminded that everyone has a story, a talent, and a hidden depth. The homeless man remained seated for a while, sipping water, watching people move past, knowing that for a brief moment he had shared something true and beautiful with the world. And as he packed up his few belongings and prepared to move on, there was a quiet satisfaction in his heart, a sense that the music he carried could never be taken away, no matter the circumstances. After the first few notes, the crowd that had gathered around the piano seemed to grow larger. People who were walking by slowed down, some stopping entirely to see the man at the piano. The sound of his music was soft at first, almost like a gentle ripple across the busy city square. It was hard to believe that someone who looked so tired and worn could produce such a clear, beautiful melody. The man's fingers moved carefully over the keys, but there was a confidence in them that only came from years of experience. Every note had meaning, every chord was deliberate. He didn't rush. He let the music breathe. People in the crowd began to lean in, some closing their eyes to listen more intently. A mother standing with her child whispered, "Listen to that. Isn't it beautiful?" The child nodded quietly, mesmerized by the sound. The businessman who had laughed before now watched with a furrowed brow. He had expected something clumsy or simple, a performance that would make him shake his head in amusement. Instead, he found himself drawn to the music. The melody was gentle but full of emotion, a mixture of sorrow and hope. He shifted uncomfortably, realizing he had judged the man too quickly. The homeless man played a short sequence of notes that seemed almost like a question, a small inquiry to the audience. The crowd responded without words, simply listening. Then he answered his own question with another series of notes, richer and fuller, filling the space with sound that seemed impossible to come from someone so quietly standing in front of a worn cup. The piano sang under his fingers and the city noises faded into the background. People began to recognize the skill in his playing. It was not flashy or showy, but precise and full of feeling. Some murmured to each other, pointing out how unusual it was to hear someone play so well outside a concert hall. Others pulled out their phones, capturing the moment to share later. But the man at the piano didn't pay attention to any of that. His eyes were often closed, lost in the music, or occasionally glanced at the keys with concentration. He was in his own world, yet connected to everyone around him. Coins and bills continued to drop into his cup, but the man didn't look at them. He played as if giving a gift, not asking for one. A young man in the crowd said quietly to his friend, "He doesn't even need the money for this. He's giving this because he can." The friend nodded, realizing that the music itself was more valuable than anything else in that moment. The businessman had stopped laughing completely. He leaned against a nearby wall, watching as the man's hands moved effortlessly. The notes flowed smoothly, sometimes delicate and sometimes powerful. A balance of control and emotion that only comes from a deep connection with one's craft. There was a subtle story in the music, one that seemed to hint at struggles and victories, moments of loneliness and glimpses of joy. People around him felt it too, even if they didn't know the exact story. The homeless man shifted slightly, his fingers gliding to the higher keys. The melody became brighter, more hopeful. The crowd felt a lift in their hearts, as if the music was touching something deep inside them. A few people had tears in their eyes, surprised by how moved they felt. They had come expecting nothing, but the man at the piano had given them something unforgettable. A hotel employee stepped closer, bringing a small bottle of water. The man accepted it with a quiet nod, never breaking his focus. He played for a long while, seamlessly moving between different melodies. Sometimes the notes were soft, almost a whisper, and then they grew louder, full of life and energy. Every movement of his hands seemed intentional, telling a story without needing any words. People began to talk quietly among themselves. "Who is he?" one woman asked. "I've never seen anyone play like this in public before." Others shook their heads, equally astonished. A young man approached the businessman who had laughed, nudging him gently. "You were wrong about him," he said. The businessman didn't reply at first. He simply continued to listen, trying to process the feeling of humility mixed with awe. The music seemed to pull everyone closer, creating a small community in the midst of the busy square. People who had been rushing along their morning commute now stood still, listening. A street performer with a guitar nearby stopped playing, watching silently. Even the pigeons seemed to pause, hopping closer to hear the sound. It was as if the piano and the man playing it had created a small bubble of calm and wonder in the middle of the city. The homeless man transitioned into a more complex piece. The notes moved quickly in some sections, demonstrating his skill and control, then slowed again, allowing the audience to feel each note. It was a delicate balance of technical ability and deep emotion, and it captivated everyone who was listening. Some in the crowd whispered to each other about how remarkable it was that someone so modest could have such talent. As he played, a few people began dropping small notes in his cup, but now it was more than just money for food. It was a sign of respect, of gratitude for sharing his talent. People who had initially scoffed at the idea of him playing were now quietly amazed. The businessman who had laughed earlier shifted uncomfortably, realizing that he had misjudged the man entirely. His smirk was gone, replaced with a thoughtful, almost guilty expression. The man at the piano didn't stop. He moved through different melodies, exploring emotions and themes without words. The crowd continued to grow, and the air was filled with a quiet sense of awe. People who had been strangers moments ago felt connected through the music. The sound created a bridge between their different lives, their worries and their joy, all united in the shared experience. A young woman in the crowd whispered to her friend, "It's like he's telling us his life story through the piano." The friend nodded, feeling the same connection. Some people in the audience had tears in their eyes, touched by the raw emotion in the music. The homeless man played not for fame or recognition, but because he had something inside him that needed to be expressed. The businessman finally spoke, almost under his breath. "I never thought. He's amazing." He didn't say it to anyone else, but the words reflected a change in his heart. He had been ready to laugh, to feel superior, but now he was humbled. He watched as the man continued to play, realizing that talent and humanity could never be measured by appearances. As the music swelled, some people began to quietly clap in appreciation. Others smiled warmly, and a few nodded in silent acknowledgement. The homeless man's eyes opened briefly, and he glanced at the crowd with a humble smile, acknowledging their presence but not seeking their praise. His focus remained on the piano, on the story he was telling through the notes. Time seemed to stand still. The busy city around them continued its routine, but in this small corner there was a sense of peace and wonder. The homeless man's music had transformed the moment, showing that beauty could come from the most unexpected places. The crowd felt it deeply, and even the businessman felt a warmth in his chest, a realization that life was full of surprises. The man at the piano finally slowed the melody, transitioning into a softer, gentle conclusion. The notes lingered in the air, fading gradually. The crowd stood quietly as if not wanting to break the magic. A few people stepped closer to drop the last coins into his cup, and he accepted them with a nod, offering a small, grateful smile. He closed the piano gently, taking a deep breath. For a moment the square was quiet, the spell of the music still hanging in the air. People looked at each other, sharing smiles and quiet words about what they had just experienced. It was a shared moment, a memory they would carry with them long after the music stopped. The businessman finally spoke aloud, his voice carrying a note of respect. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly. The homeless man nodded, not saying anything. His focus on the feeling of the music and the connection it had created. He didn't need words to acknowledge the change. The performance had done that already. People began to move on, continuing their daily routines, but the impression of the music lingered. Some whispered to themselves about how unexpected and beautiful it had been. Others shared their experience with friends or on social media. And the man at the piano, the one who had come asking only for food, had given them something far greater, a glimpse of humanity, resilience, and the power of hidden talent. He packed up his few belongings slowly, still aware of the respect and awe around him, and prepared to move on. He didn't need applause or attention. He only needed the simple act of sharing his music, and in doing so, he had touched the hearts of everyone who had stopped to listen. The crowd that had gathered near the hotel piano had grown even larger by now. People had come from different streets, curious about the music that had drawn them like a magnet. The once dismissive passerby, the businessman, was standing quietly, almost hidden in the crowd, observing with a new sense of respect. The homeless man, whose only intent had been to earn a simple meal, now found himself at the center of attention. He looked around for a brief moment, acknowledging the presence of those who had stopped to listen. But he did not let it distract him from the music. He began to play again, but this time the music was deeper, richer. It carried emotion that was almost tangible. Each chord seemed to tell a story of struggle, endurance, and hope. His fingers danced over the keys with a combination of precision and passion that made everyone watching feel the intensity of the moment. People in the crowd were silent, captivated, as if the music itself had created a bond among them, drawing them together in awe. Some people had cameras and phones out, recording the performance, but no one was trying to intrude on the man's space. Everyone seemed to understand that this was a moment to witness and not to disturb. A young woman in the front row wiped a tear from her eye. She whispered to a friend, "It's like he's pouring his life into the piano. Can you feel it?" The friend nodded, his face solemn and thoughtful. Even the businessman could feel the change in his chest, a stirring of emotions he hadn't felt in years. The homeless man transitioned seamlessly into a different melody. It was faster now, a playful yet sophisticated rhythm that showcased not only technical skill but creativity and musical understanding far beyond what anyone had expected. The notes flowed effortlessly, and yet there was a subtle control in the movement of his hands that suggested years of disciplined practice. His eyes closed again, lost in the music, while the crowd watched, transfixed. A child in the audience tugged at their parent's sleeve, pointing toward the piano. "Look, Mom, he's amazing." The parent smiled, realizing that their child was right. The music was mesmerizing, and everyone in that small crowd could feel its power. Even people passing by stopped to listen, pausing their busy lives to be part of this extraordinary moment. The businessman's expression had softened. He had initially laughed at the man's request to play for food, mocking him in front of others, but now he was silent, almost embarrassed. He had underestimated not only the man but also the power of talent that had been hidden beneath years of hardship. He crossed his arms and leaned back slightly, unwilling to interrupt or intrude, but fully aware that what he was witnessing was exceptional. The homeless man's music began to take on a narrative quality. It was as if each note carried a memory, a fragment of a life lived in hardship and resilience. People felt the emotions without needing to know the exact story. They sensed loneliness, pain, joy, and hope, all intertwined in the melodies. The notes seemed to float in the air, wrapping around the listeners and touching them in a way that words could not. A few people had tears in their eyes, quietly moved by the music, while others simply stood still, absorbing every sound. He shifted into an even more complex section of the piece. Rapid arpeggios filled the air, moving up and down the piano keys with flawless precision. The crowd reacted with quiet awe. People exchanged glances, whispering to each other in disbelief.
"Where did he learn to play like this?"
One asked. "I don't know," another replied. "It's incredible." Some members of the audience began to drop more coins and bills into the man's cup. It was no longer just a gesture of charity. It was an acknowledgement of the talent and emotion he was sharing. The homeless man nodded in quiet gratitude but did not let it distract him. His eyes remained on the piano, his mind fully engaged in the music. He was present in the moment, giving everything he had to the sound he created. The businessman finally spoke quietly to himself, a tone of humility in his voice. "I never thought someone like him could do this." His words were almost a confession, admitting that he had been wrong in his assumptions. He had judged based on appearance, on circumstance, and now he realized how wrong that judgment had been. The homeless man had more talent, more skill, and more depth than he could have imagined. A hotel employee who had been watching from a distance stepped forward with a small cup of water and a few snacks. The man accepted them with a nod, grateful for the kindness but never breaking his focus. He drank quietly, then returned to the piano, his fingers moving across the keys with renewed energy and determination. The music began to tell a more intricate story. It was no longer just about skill or performance. It was about life itself. The notes spoke of struggle and resilience, of moments of despair and flashes of hope. The crowd could feel the layers of experience that had shaped this man, each note a reflection of his journey. People were mesmerized as if they were being given a glimpse into his soul. A young girl in the crowd whispered to her mother, "I've never heard anything like this." Her mother nodded, her eyes wide. Others in the audience felt the same, a mix of awe, respect, and emotional connection. The man at the piano did not need to speak. His music was communicating everything. The businessman, who had once mocked the man, now stood with his hands clasped in front of him. He felt a strange mixture of regret, admiration, and humility. He had underestimated the man completely, and now he was witnessing something extraordinary. The notes seemed to challenge his assumptions and remind him of the danger of judging someone based on appearances. As the homeless man continued, he began to vary the tempo and intensity of the music. Some sections were soft and contemplative, almost like a whisper, while others were bold and powerful, filling the square with sound. The contrast kept the audience engaged, moving their emotions in rhythm with the music. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, while others simply watched in awe, unable to believe the skill and emotion on display. A few members of the crowd began to record the performance on their phones, but they did so respectfully, understanding that this was not a performance for attention but an expression of something deeply personal. The homeless man seemed unaware of the cameras, entirely focused on the music. Each note, each chord was deliberate, carefully chosen to convey the emotion he felt inside. As the music reached a particularly moving section, a hush fell over the crowd. The rapid notes slowed, giving way to a hauntingly beautiful melody that seemed to capture the essence of his life. People felt it deeply, as if they were sharing in his memories, his struggles, and his small victories. A man in the audience whispered, "It's like he's speaking to us without words." Others nodded, feeling the same profound connection. The businessman finally spoke again, quietly, almost to himself. "I should never have laughed. I was wrong. He's incredible." He felt a pang of guilt for mocking the man earlier, but also a sense of admiration for the way he was playing. He realized that he had been given a rare gift, a chance to witness raw talent and human resilience up close. The homeless man began to bring the music to a close, transitioning into a gentle, reflective piece. The notes were soft and deliberate, each one lingering in the air. The crowd remained silent, fully absorbed, not wanting the moment to end. The music felt like a farewell, a final message that was both personal and universal. As the last note faded, A wave of quiet appreciation washed over the crowd. People clapped softly, some even weeping quietly. The homeless man closed the piano gently, his hands lingering on the keys for a moment before releasing them. He looked around at the faces before him, offering a small, humble nod. He did not speak, for he did not need to. The music had said everything. The businessman approached cautiously, feeling a mix of humility and curiosity. I want to apologize," he said, his voice sincere. The homeless man nodded slightly, acknowledging the words without comment. There was no need for further conversation. The respect had already been earned through the music. People began to disperse slowly, many stopping to drop a few more coins or notes into the man's cup. Some offered kind words, thanking him for sharing his talent and touching their hearts. The homeless man accepted each gesture with quiet gratitude, remaining humble and focused on the simple act of expressing himself through music. A music teacher who had been walking by noticed the skill and emotion in the man's playing and approached him carefully. "Excuse me," she said softly, "but do you have formal training? I've never seen anyone play with such precision and emotion." The man smiled faintly, shaking his head. "I learned a long time ago," he said quietly. "Life taught me, and the piano helped me remember." She nodded, understanding that this was not just talent but a life shaped by experience and hardship. As the crowd thinned, the homeless man packed up his few belongings, still holding the cup in one hand. He walked slowly, savoring the sense of connection he had created. The city around him returned to its usual pace, but for those who had listened, the moment would remain unforgettable. They had witnessed more than just a performance. They had experienced a story of resilience, emotion, and the power of human spirit. The businessman lingered for a moment, watching the man disappear into the crowd. He felt a quiet respect, a recognition that life often held surprises and lessons in unexpected places. He realized that wealth and status could not measure the depth of talent or the strength of character. The music had spoken louder than any words ever could. People in the crowd slowly started talking among themselves, sharing their awe and gratitude. Many felt inspired, moved by the raw honesty and beauty of the performance. The homeless man, once dismissed and laughed at, had become a teacher without words, showing everyone that talent, courage, and dignity can be found in the most unlikely of places. As he walked away, the piano remained polished and gleaming under the sun, but it was no longer just a beautiful instrument. It was a vessel for human connection, a reminder that the simplest gestures can touch hearts and change perspectives. The music had created a memory that would live in the minds of everyone who had stopped to listen. A story of hope, skill, and the power of expressing one's truth. The next day, the city seemed to hum with the memory of the piano performance. People who had witnessed the homeless man play walked through the streets, talking to friends and colleagues about what they had seen. They shared clips from their phones, showing the music that had captivated everyone. It was a rare story of unexpected talent and human resilience that had captured hearts across the city. Word spread quickly, and soon more people came to the hotel square to see the man at the piano. He appeared again, carrying his worn backpack, but his steps were steadier now. There was a quiet pride in him, though he did not show it openly. He approached the piano, his eyes scanning the small crowd that had already begun to gather, a mix of familiar faces from the day before and new onlookers drawn by curiosity. He set down his few belongings and adjusted the bench. His fingers hovered over the keys, a moment of stillness before the music began. Then, almost instinctively, he played a soft note. The sound rippled through the square, drawing attention immediately. People leaned in, anticipating the music that had already become a story throughout the city. This time, the homeless man played with more confidence, more freedom. His fingers moved with a grace that suggested a lifetime of familiarity with the instrument. Each note seemed to carry a story, every chord a memory. The crowd watched quietly, sensing that this was no ordinary performance. It was personal, intimate, and moving. A few people approached with flowers and notes, small gestures of appreciation for the music and the man who had created it. He accepted them with a nod, grateful but focused on the piano. The businessman from the day before was there again, standing slightly to the side, observing silently. His expression had softened, a mix of awe and humility. He had learned a lesson in judgment and respect in just one day. The homeless man's music began to tell a story without words. It was a tale of hardship, of nights spent alone, of moments of despair and glimpses of hope. Each section of the piece was deliberate, building tension and releasing it in a way that felt natural and emotional. The crowd felt the journey along with him, caught in the ebb and flow of the music. People were quiet, almost reverent. They watched as his fingers moved with speed and precision, creating complex passages that were both impressive and moving. Others listened to the soft, reflective moments, feeling the emotion behind every note. There was a unity in the audience, a shared recognition of the depth and beauty of the performance. Some people recorded the performance again, but this time they did so to capture a moment of inspiration. They understood that what they were witnessing was rare, something that could touch the soul and leave a lasting impression. The homeless man seemed unaware of the attention, fully immersed in the music and the feelings it brought. The businessman finally stepped closer, unable to resist the pull of the music. He watched, captivated, as the man's hands moved effortlessly across the keys. The complexity of the piece combined with the raw emotion was impossible to ignore. He felt a deep respect growing for the man who had been so quickly judged the day before. As the music continued, the homeless man began to play faster sequences, demonstrating not only technical skill but also creativity. The melody was intricate, yet it never felt forced. Each note seemed natural, flowing from the heart and mind of the musician. The crowd was mesmerized, some leaning forward, others closing their eyes to better feel the music. A music teacher in the audience recognized the mastery in the playing and approached after a moment. She had been a performer herself, and could tell that the man had years of formal training, even if life had led him down a difficult path. "Your talent is incredible," she said softly, not wanting to disturb the performance. He nodded politely, acknowledging her words without breaking focus. The crowd began to whisper among themselves, sharing their awe and admiration. Some had tears in their eyes, touched by the emotion that seemed to come directly from the pianist's life. Others simply stood in silence, letting the music wash over them. It was clear that this performance was more than entertainment. It was an experience that connected everyone to the human story behind the notes. As the music reached its peak, the homeless man played with intensity and passion. The notes were powerful, filling the square with sound and emotion. The audience felt a collective rush, a wave of appreciation for the skill and dedication that had brought such beauty into their lives. The businessman who had laughed the day before now stood quietly, watching with a newfound respect. He understood the lesson in humility and the importance of not underestimating others. After the powerful section, the music softened again, shifting into a gentle, reflective melody. The notes lingered in the air, creating a sense of calm and peace. The crowd felt a shared understanding, a connection to the story the pianist was telling. It was a reminder of the strength and resilience of the human spirit, and how beauty can be found in unexpected places. A few people approached the man after the performance, offering kind words and small tokens of appreciation. He accepted them with quiet gratitude, never losing the humility that had always been a part of him. The crowd remained engaged, many returning to watch him play again as the day continued. News reporters had started to arrive, drawn by the story of the homeless pianist who had captivated the city. They interviewed people in the crowd, capturing the reactions of those who had witnessed the music. The story spread quickly, reaching newspapers, social media, and local news outlets. People were inspired by the resilience and talent of the man who had once been overlooked and dismissed. The homeless man continued to play for hours, sharing his music with anyone who would listen. His performances were not just about showing skill, they were about connecting with people, sharing emotions and telling a story that could not be expressed in words alone. The crowd grew and shifted throughout the day, but the music remained a constant, drawing people in and leaving them changed. The businessman approached him again after one performance. "I want to help," he said sincerely. "You shouldn't have to play for food. You have too much talent." The homeless man looked at him quietly, considering the words. He nodded, appreciating the offer but not letting it change his focus. His music was always about the connection, not the reward. As evening approached, the city square began to empty, but the impact of the day lingered. People walked away talking about the performance, feeling inspired and moved. The homeless man packed up his belongings, preparing to leave. but he knew that the music he shared had made a difference. He had reminded people that talent, courage, and resilience could be found in anyone, regardless of their circumstances. The next day, the story of the homeless pianist was everywhere. Social media posts, news articles, and word of mouth spread the tale of the man who had played for food and left an entire city in awe. People who had never met him felt a connection through the music, inspired by the story of someone who had turned hardship into beauty. Opportunities began to appear. Local music teachers reached out, offering lessons and guidance. Philanthropists and community members expressed interest in helping him find a stable place to live and perform. Invitations to play at events and small concerts came in, but he remained grounded, focused on the music and the people he reached through it. The businessman who had mocked him initially became one of his quiet supporters. He attended performances, spread the story, and helped connect the pianist with people who could assist him in rebuilding his life. There was a mutual respect that had grown, a recognition that life had unexpected lessons, and that true talent could not be measured by circumstances alone. The homeless man continued to play in the square for a while, but his performances became more organized. People knew when and where to find him, and he played for audiences who had grown to appreciate not just the skill, but the story behind the music. He remained humble, never seeking fame or recognition, only sharing the gift that had carried him through difficult times. As weeks passed, his life began to change. He found a small apartment with help from supporters and began teaching music to children and adults. His story inspired others, showing that talent, determination, and kindness could overcome even the toughest circumstances. The piano remained central to his life, a tool for expression and connection. The city square where he had first played became a place of inspiration. People returned, sometimes to hear him play, sometimes to remember the moment that had touched their hearts. The story of the homeless pianist who astounded everyone with his talent became a symbol of hope and the power of human spirit. Through all this, the man remained humble. He never forgot the day he had asked to play for food, nor the reactions of those who had doubted him. The music had opened doors, connected people, and changed lives, but he continued to focus on the joy of playing and the beauty of sharing something meaningful. The lessons of humility, resilience, and the unspoken bond created by music became the foundation of his new life, one note at a time. The city had not forgotten the man who played the piano. His story had traveled through streets, homes, and workplaces, reaching people far beyond the square where he had first sat down. The homeless man, once only seeking a small meal, had become a symbol of resilience and talent. Yet despite the growing recognition, he remained humble, focused on the music itself rather than the attention. He woke up one morning in his small apartment, sunlight filtering through the window. It was a modest place, provided through the support of those who had been touched by his story, but it was safe and warm. He had a simple breakfast, and as he sipped his tea, he reflected on how much his life had changed in a short time. The piano, his lifelong companion, stood in the corner, gleaming under the morning light. Even here it felt like the center of his world. By mid-morning he was walking to the square, his fingers brushing over the keys of his portable sheet music as he prepared for the day's performance. The crowd had grown accustomed to seeing him there, but each day brought new faces, curious people who had heard of the man who once played for food. The energy in the square was different now, filled with expectation and excitement rather than mere curiosity. He arrived and set up quickly, arranging his few belongings neatly beside the piano. The anticipation from the crowd was palpable. Children stood near the front, eyes wide with wonder. Parents whispered to one another, recalling stories of the pianist who had captured a city's heart. Even the businessman who had mocked him in the past arrived early, standing quietly to the side. He watched with admiration, a newfound respect in his eyes. The homeless man seated himself at the piano, his fingers hovering briefly above the keys. Then, as if answering an unspoken invitation, he began to play. The music flowed naturally, effortlessly. It was not only technically beautiful, but emotionally profound. Each note carried warmth and depth, telling stories of struggle, resilience, and quiet triumph. The audience, both familiar and new, was captivated instantly. A young girl in the front row whispered to her mother, "Mom, it's like he's speaking without words." The mother nodded, feeling the same deep connection. People who had passed by stopped to listen, unable to resist the pull of the melody. Some had tears in their eyes, while others simply stood still, absorbed in the music and the story it told. It was a shared moment of human connection, brought together by sound and emotion. As the piece progressed, the man's fingers danced across the keys with increasing confidence. He moved from soft, reflective melodies to faster, more intricate sequences that demonstrated both skill and creativity. The music was alive, dynamic, and compelling. Each chord seemed to invite the audience into his experience, bridging the gap between his past struggles and the present moment of shared joy. People in the crowd began to drop coins and bills into the cup at the edge of the piano, not merely as charity, but as a sign of respect and admiration. The homeless man accepted these gestures humbly, never letting them distract him from the music. His focus was absolute, his passion evident in every movement, every note. The businessman approached slowly, feeling a sense of humility he had not anticipated. He had judged the man quickly, laughed at his request to play for food, and yet here he stood, unable to deny the extraordinary talent before him. He watched silently, appreciating the beauty and depth of the music. The man at the piano did not look at him directly, yet the acknowledgement was felt, a mutual understanding that talent and spirit could not be measured by circumstance. As the performance continued, the homeless man shifted into a more emotional piece, one that carried the weight of his past experiences. The crowd was affected deeply. Some people were moved to tears. Others felt a warmth spreading through them, a sense of connection and shared humanity. The music spoke of hardship, of loss, and of hope, weaving a tapestry of life that everyone present could feel. A local music teacher, who had followed the story since the beginning, approached quietly and listened. She recognized the technique, the precision, and the emotional depth. It was clear that this man had been trained at some point, yet life had led him to a place of hardship. She marveled at the resilience and passion that had allowed him to retain and express such talent despite his circumstances. The audience was completely absorbed. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others watched intently, noting the subtle movements of his hands, the gentle shifts in tempo, the expressive dynamics. The piano became more than an instrument. It was a voice conveying stories that could not be told in words. The crowd understood that this performance was a gift, a rare connection to the human spirit. As the piece reached its peak, the homeless man played with extraordinary passion and control. The music swelled, filling the square with sound that was both powerful and beautiful. The crowd felt the emotion intensely, united in admiration and awe. Even those who had initially doubted him were now completely absorbed, realizing that talent and humanity cannot be judged by appearance alone. The businessman, moved by the music and the transformation he had witnessed, finally spoke. "I underestimated you," he said quietly. "I am truly sorry." The homeless man nodded gently, accepting the apology without comment. The mutual respect was clear, and it spoke volumes more than any words could have conveyed. After the performance, the man at the piano allowed himself a small moment of relief. The applause and appreciation from the audience were heartfelt, not exaggerated or performative. People approached him, offering thanks, praise, and gestures of support. Some offered small gifts while others simply smiled, recognizing the talent and courage it took to perform despite his past struggles. Opportunities continued to arise. Invitations came from music schools, local theaters, and cultural organizations. People wanted to hear him play in more formal settings, to share his talent with wider audiences. Yet he remained grounded, focusing on the joy of music and the connection it created rather than the fame or recognition. He began to teach music to children and adults in the community, sharing the lessons he had learned through both life and practice. His students admired his skill and dedication, and they learned not only about music but also about resilience, humility, and the power of expression. The homeless man, once overlooked and dismissed, had become a teacher and mentor, inspiring others through his story and talent. The businessman who had once mocked him became a quiet supporter, attending performances, helping connect him with people who could assist in rebuilding his life, and spreading the story of the man who had turned hardship into beauty. There was a sense of mutual respect and understanding, a recognition that life often offers lessons in unexpected places. The city square where he had first played became a place of inspiration. People returned, sometimes to hear him play, sometimes simply to remember the moment that had touched their hearts. The piano remained central to his life, a tool for expression, a symbol of resilience, and a bridge to others. Even as his life changed, the man remained humble. He did not seek fame, wealth, or recognition beyond the music itself. Each performance was a gift, a connection, a way to touch hearts and share a story. He remembered the day he had asked to play for food and the laughter he had faced. That memory grounded him, reminding him of where he had been and how far he had come. The community continued to support him, celebrating not only his talent, but also the courage and humility that had defined his journey. His story became a symbol of hope, demonstrating that perseverance, passion, and integrity could overcome even the toughest challenges. He had reminded people that talent can exist anywhere, and that human spirit and creativity are more valuable than circumstances or appearances. Through each performance, he shared more than music. He shared a story of life, struggle, and triumph. People who had once doubted him learned the importance of looking beyond the surface, of recognizing potential and worth in every individual. His music connected people, inspired them, and reminded them of the beauty that could be found in unexpected places. He continued to teach, perform, and inspire, remaining true to the principles that had carried him through life. The piano was not just an instrument, but a voice, a companion, and a bridge to others. Each note he played carried emotion, experience, and hope. His performances became cherished moments, remembered by those who witnessed them and shared with those who had yet to discover the story. In the end, the man who once asked to play for food had become a source of inspiration and joy. His life had changed, not just because of recognition or opportunity, but because he had remained true to himself and the music that had always been his companion. The city that had doubted him now celebrated him, not only for his skill but for his humility, resilience, and humanity. He continued to play, teach, and share his story, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who crossed his path. The music, the courage, and the connection he had created lived on, proving that talent, determination, and the human spirit could triumph over even the most difficult circumstances. The homeless man had found a new life, a life filled with purpose, connection, and the joy of sharing his gift with the world. And as he played, the music continued to touch hearts, a testament to the power of resilience, humility, and the enduring beauty of human creativity.